everybody here knows that Cambridge and Boston and the surrounding communities are the home of kind of research universities that are really key players in the local and national economy. And as we've heard, these institutions are critically dependent on federal funds that come to them directly through research grants. So they're not shown in the state budget, right? They're kind of invisible to most people. And in fact, is generally not known by the general public, the role of these grants in keeping these institutions going. Mike mentioned, the bill more than, in the CD, in our congressional district, more than 1.7 billion in NIH grants to 50 institutions, more than 100 million to MIT. And then there's Environmental Protection Agency grants, NOAA, NASA, DOE. It's really a major source of income. Now, these funds, they pay the salaries of graduate students, the salary of research technicians, salary of postdoctoral fellows. They buy the test tubes and the pipettes and the centrifuges. And as we heard in the overhead discussion, they pay for the cost of keeping the building running, the heat and the electricity and et cetera. And this biomedical infrastructure is actually at the heart of the U.S. pharmaceutical industry. It's all kinds of problems with the pharmaceutical industry, but they do make some medicines that do work. As you've heard in Trump's original budget, he was going to cut these programs by about 20%. These are the steepest cuts that were proposed since the origin of the NIH and NSF after World War II. When asked by the National Governors Association why such popular programs were being cut, Budget Director Mick Mulvaney answered, it was necessary to provide the 10% increase in the Pentagon budget that they were promoting. That's in the New York Times of March 23rd. So straight public statement, we got to cut these programs for human needs because we need to give it to Lockheed Martin and Raytheon, et cetera. Subsequently, so Trump, he picked a number out of a hat, 10%, 57 billion. Subsequently, John McCain, chair of the Armed Services Committee, said, hey, 57 billion isn't enough. And he pushed through an $80 billion increase. That's more than the defense budgets of all the countries were supposed to be arrayed against. Now, this is certainly not an effort to shrink government. The Republicans support small government only for civilian programs. On the Pentagon side, they support the biggest weapons contracts that the taxpayers can support. Now, I think most Americans are coming to understand the dangers we face from the Trump Republican cuts in the Affordable Care Act, cuts in Medicaid, as we heard in the last panel. However, even the best current medical care remains inadequate for major areas of human disease, such as stroke, arthritis, Alzheimer's, diabetes, right? All the things I'm afraid of, if I get them, there's no hope for me, right? There's nothing we can do right now for Alzheimer's. Very little we can do for stroke, et cetera. So our prospects for finding therapies and cures for those debilitating diseases and burdens rests on the growth and expansion, not the shrinking, of federally funded biomedical research. That's where the future of raising the standard of living lies. Thus, the Republican budget not only threatens our current health care, as we have heard, but it sabotages our ability to lessen the burden of health care, of ill health and disease that will be inflicted on us and our children in future years. Now, it wasn't that, in fact, for many years prior to the current budget, biomedical research and environmental protection have been starved. It's been static for many years now. In FY16, out of the $1.1 trillion congressional discretionary budget, $600 billion to the Pentagon, $32 billion to NIH for research on all diseases and conditions of health. So 3 numbers to learn, to talk to your neighbors. Overall congressional budget, 1.2 trillion. That's all our tax dollars, right? 600 billion of that to the Pentagon, 30 billion for all research having to do with disease and healthcare, et cetera. Useful numbers. $32 billion for all the health problems that afflict us is a pittance compared to the real need, and certainly compared to $600 billion that we're going to spend on the Pentagon. Why isn't there more money? Because one of the mechanisms to finance the $600 billion Pentagon budget is to starve every civilian program and to put it on the deficit, right? They got two mechanisms. Now, let me give you a very concrete example, which is Alzheimer's disease. Our chair, Mike Van Elseker, studies brain damage, post-traumatic stress disorder, and is in a center where there are plenty of people research on this. The incidence of these diseases are increasing as our lifespan increases, at least for those of us whose lifespan increases. Some people's lifespan is not. But neurodegenerative disease currently afflicts more than 4.5 million Americans. That includes Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and Huntington's. By 2050, those numbers for Alzheimer's alone are expected to triple to 13.2 million. So these long-lasting afflictions have a great emotional economic cost on the families, right? Because the person is still healthy at some level and needs constant health care. So you have the burden on the person, then the burden on the people who have to take care of them on the families. It's really, it's very serious. Alzheimer's Association projects that caring for the patients with Alzheimer's will cost all payers, Medicare, Medicaid, individuals, private insurance, $20 trillion over the next 40 years. And that dollar cost is dwarfed by the social and emotional cost of these people and their families. They're taken out of the workforce, economically non-productive, et cetera. It's really a human tragedy. Now, this is not a biomedical audience, but you can trust me. The fact of the matter is there really has been progress on this in the last 20 years because of all this research. We know the proteins in the brain that are damaged in Alzheimer's. We know the pathway of pathology. We know the areas of the brain that get damaged. The situation is absolutely rife for therapy soon enough that I'd have a chance of avoiding it, and many of us in the room would have a chance of avoiding it, except for a few small problems. With something like Alzheimer's, you can't find a good therapy with a mice or a rat or a rabbit. You actually have to have human beings and aging human beings in the clinical trials. Enormously expensive, and you have to follow them and do very sophisticated testing to look for the side effects. So there's no way to do this research on the cheap. And pharmaceutical companies are limited how much they're going to invest in this. We're at the point where what we need is a moon program for Alzheimer's. It wouldn't even be that expensive. Current research all across the U.S. is $1 billion. A tenfold increase would only be $10 billion. That would only bring the NIH budget to 4% of the total. Now let's compare that to the Pentagon side. And I'm just going to talk about submarines. Submarines. The U.S. has 14 Ohio-class submarines. Each of them has a dozen independent missiles. Each missile has 10 independently targeted warheads. One submarine launching its missiles obliterates the major cities of any country on Earth, Russia or China or India. Just one submarine, intentionally or by accident. The administration is proposing buying 8 more, not the Navy, right? This is coming from somewhere else. It's coming from the country. Where's it coming from? It's coming from the companies that would get the contracts. Those are the people who want 8 more submarines. $100 billion. We don't have $10 billion to save millions of Americans from Alzheimer's, but we got $100 billion to buy new submarines that are going to decrease national security, increase the chance of an accidental loss. It is crazy. So Robbie, I would say the biggest boondoggle in human history, the diversion of the U.S. social wealth into these weapons programs. Now, you can't use these weapons for anything, not even with North Korea. You can't stop terrorists, right? It didn't stop 9/11. It didn't stop the bombers in the Paris subway or anything like that. It's not going to stop the Koreans. You can't use these weapons. They have nothing to do with national defense. They're the mechanism of enriching the executives and the owners of the weapons industry. That is what it's about, right? Now, unfortunately, those folks got $600 billion to play with, and so they got a lot of political influence. So let me close with the fact that those of us who want health care are going to have to start talking about building fewer nuclear weapons. Those of us who are worried about nuclear weapons are going to have to recognize that if you're worried about losing your health care, you don't give a damn about nuclear weapons. And we are going to have to explain to them that we're with you on health care. How come in the richest country on earth we don't have what we need? Because we're diverting it there. Now, I want to close with some of you are thinking, what the hell did I come out to this forum for? You know, it's all very interesting, but I'm just depressed. Right. You're going to hear in the closing panel about some campaigns that are going on, one of which is the People's Budget campaign, which is an alternative budget of the Progressive Caucus in the Congress, so it's real, right? And it ups all of these programs, housing, health care, and infrastructure. And it actually does, it's careful and cautious, because these are real sitting congressmen, but it actually cuts on the military side. And we need a group of people in Massachusetts who are going to, take up this People's Budget and run with it, translate it into language that works for the people you talk to. And the people in this room are our target audience to engage in the period to come. And as these budgets get more and more outrageous, people are beginning to be aware, oh, the budget. Oh, yeah, there's a congressional budget. Yeah, it matters. So we think that's something that you could not talk to anybody about without putting them to sleep. And believe me, I have put audiences to sleep trying to talk about a budget we're going to be able to bring alive. Thanks a lot.